All right. With that, I'm going to introduce our speaker for today, Kolman Rosenberg. Most of you know him. He's been a longtime member, joined, I guess, in 1975, and it's kind of an on and off member since then. He is an instructor in the fundamentals class, teaches exposure and sports photography, or okay. And then worked for Dodd for about 6 years, and is currently an instructor at Tri-C, both East and Westlake.
Westlake, yeah.
Okay, good. So with that, and Kolman was scheduled to go back in December, but we had some issues. So he's now doing his presentation on famous women photographers. So Kolman, take it away.
Great, thanks, Mike. Let me do the share screen here. And okay, is that working?
You got it.
Okay, great. Well, we've been doing these presentations for quite a few years now. Originally, they started out being called emulating famous photographers, but they've sort of changed in their focus to just now really introducing or talking about what I call masters of photography, just photographers that I think people should be aware of and get to know. And most of them, many of them are well known, but not all of them. About a year ago, switched the focus a little bit to more fine art photography. We had some of the members had mentioned to me that, you know, we were doing mostly photojournalists and documentary types of photographers. And so for a little while, I switched the emphasis to more fine art. But tonight, going back again a little bit to more photojournalistic or documentary type photographers. And I'm going to talk about three photographers tonight: Mary Ellen Mark, Amy Vitale, and Lynsey Addario. And these are more contemporary, although Mary Ellen Mark passed away in 2015, but still a contemporary photographer. And Amy Vitale and Lynsey Addario are still practicing today. They're considerably younger and, as I said, still actively working in the field today. So I'm going to start out with Mary Ellen Mark. And Mary Ellen Mark was born in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania, March 20th, 1940. She died in New York City, May 25th, 2015. We're almost on the anniversary of her death here, 6 years ago. She started photographing at the age of 9 with a Brownie box camera. After school, got a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Pennsylvania in 1962, and then master's degree in photojournalism at the Annenberg School for Communication at the University of Pennsylvania in 1964. 1965, she took a Fulbright scholarship, which took her to Turkey for 1 year. It's interesting that originally in high school, she was interested in art and initially went to college to study fine art history and painting. So she kind of started out as a painter and then eventually got into photography. So in 1966 or 1967, she moved to New York City and began photographing Vietnam War protests, women's liberation activities, the transvestite culture, and developed a sensibility away from the mainstream society and towards more interesting, often troubled fringes. She was famous for taking photos of unfamous people on the edge, sort of on the edges of our society. I found a quote where she said, "I feel an affinity for people who haven't had the best breaks in society. What I want to do is acknowledge their existence." So she had very much of an emphasis on sort of showing people that many of us either don't see or don't want to see, I guess you could say. So she addressed social issues such as homelessness, loneliness, drug addiction, prostitution, mental illness. Children are also a recurring subject in much of her work. She stated, "I've always felt that children and teenagers are not children, they're just small people." And she believed in spending time with and developing relationship and trust with her subjects. She was also a unit photographer on many movie sets, shooting production stills of more than 100 movies, including Arthur Penn's Alice's Restaurant, Mike Nichols' Catch-22, Carnal Knowledge, Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, and many others. She published 18 books of photographs and had photos published in Life, Rolling Stone, The New Yorker, New York Times, and Vanity Fair. And she was a member of Magnum Photos from 1977 to 1981. That was a photo agency that made up of some very well-known photojournalists and documentary photographers. She saw herself very much as a as a street photographer, really. So here are some of her images, and a few of them might be familiar to some people, but again, you'll notice that they're very much people on the sort of the edges of our society. So I think the picture here on the top left is one of her best known photos, and certainly kind of a provocative, eye-opening photo. There are a couple others of some gang members. And the photo on the bottom right is a homeless family living in their car in Los Angeles, shot in 1987. A couple more. I don't know the story about the image on the top left there, but it's interesting. The one on the right, bottom right, is also interesting. It's you know, a young kid smoking, sort of in a, looks like a gang type of environment, or an area where you probably wouldn't want to hang around. But he's holding a stuffed animal, which is kind of interesting. You'll notice that all of her work is black and white. I'm not sure that she didn't shoot some color, but everything I've seen of hers is black and white. Here again, sort of parts of society that many of us don't see. And then here's something that she spent some time at that many of us have seen. She attended the Twinsburg Twin Festival in 2001 and 2002 and did photos using large format Polaroid cameras. But again, some of these have an edge to them. They're not the type of twin photos that most of us see of, happy, people, sets of twins and multiples at the Twins Festival. All of hers have a sort of edge to them. I noticed that these two gentlemen are even wearing watches on both hands that are the same but on opposite sides. I just noticed that today. Interesting poses. Another subject of hers was the circus, and circus performers and the lives that they led. And that's her in the photo at the top left with a circus performer. And then some of her motion picture work, as I mentioned earlier, shooting on sets of motion pictures. That's her with Marlon Brando during the filming of Apocalypse Now. I wouldn't have recognized Marlon Brando there. Dennis Hopper, John Belushi during the filming of The Blues Brothers. There's Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy. I think most of us here on this Zoom call probably know who he is and remember him, but if you're younger, you may not recognize him, but his famous daughter, Candace Bergen, who famously wrote about, I think she wrote a book and sort of mentioned that the puppet Charlie McCarthy was more of a child to her father than she was, I guess. Mother Teresa. On the set of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I don't know all of the actors here, but I do recognize Jack Nicholson and Danny DeVito. And I recognize a few of the other faces, but can't really name them. And Johnny Depp. Here again, just some interesting people. The image on the right here was some young girls at for cancer, and I believe I remember reading that the hospital sort of arranged for an in-hospital prom for them. So she wanted to make people care about other people. And she also tried to make deep connections with her subjects. She said, I just think it's important to be direct and honest with the people about why you're photographing them and what you're doing. After all, you are taking some of their soul. Thought that was an interesting quote of hers. So that's Mary Ellen Mark. Next, we've got Amy Vitale. Amy is still actively shooting. She's relatively young, born in Florida in 1971. She has a bachelor's degree in international studies from the University of North Carolina and a master's degree from the University of Miami. She's now based in Montana. She's a contract photographer for National Geographic and has done many stories for National Geographic. She's won World Press Photo Awards in 2003, 2005, 2015, 2017, and 2018. And in 2018, she won the first prize for a story in National Geographic about a community in Kenya protecting elephants. You'll see some of the photos from that story. She's been named Magazine Photographer of the Year in the International Photographer of the Year Prize. She's been named Magazine Photographer of the Year by the National Press Photographers Association. She received a Daniel Pearl Award for Outstanding Reporting. In Style magazine named her one of 50 badass women, celebrating women who show up, speak up, and get things done. And she's traveled and photographed in more than 100 countries, bearing witness not only to violence and conflict, but also to surreal beauty and the enduring power of the human spirit. One of the things you'll notice about Amy's photography is a lot of bright colors. She seems to find a lot of bright color to incorporate in her photos. So she's a founding member of Ripple Effect Images, a collective of scientists, writers, photographers, and filmmakers with a mission of creating powerful stories that illustrate how women in developing countries are affected by climate change. She's published a best-selling book, Panda Love, on the secret lives of pandas. And she frequently lectures and conducts workshops throughout the Americas, Europe, and Asia. One of a quotation of hers, "Ignorance of each other's stories leads us to assume we know them. And so we maintain perceptions of differences based on our own preconceived notions." And I think that's a pretty profound statement. So it's a couple of her National Geographic photos. The cover photo on the left is of a story she did on the transport and release of one of the last of the white rhinos. And she documented a story on the plight of the white rhinos. On the left is a story she worked on first ever community-owned and run elephant sanctuaries in Africa. And one of the things she's known for is spending months or even years on some of these stories, sort of living as in part of the story. She'll go and spend months with the people she's documenting on the stories that she's documenting, and then go back over periods of years and go back and follow these stories. She did a story on the wild side of pandas, and actually for part of the story she dressed up as a panda in order to sort of live with the pandas while she was shooting. The photo on the right there is her while shooting some of the small elephants. She believed in living the story. As I said, she didn't just fly in and shoot and leave. She spent months and even years on some of these stories. Here again, you can see some of the color. color again. This is the white rhino story. Not sure where the story with the camel was. And I think that's one of the elephants on the right. A lot of emotion in her stories. Talk about photos being worth 1,000 words. These certainly tell a story. I love the picture on the top left here. The colors are just incredible. I think that's probably why she's a big contributor to National Geographic. These were from a story she did on the fragile peace in Sri Lanka. And again, you know, just kind of helping us to know people that we wouldn't otherwise know. Just get a little taste of their lives. So she does overlap a little bit. Much of her work had to do with environmental issues, but she did get into some conflict photography as well, and some more human issues. Okay, and then the third photographer is Lynsey Addario. Lynsey also is a relatively young lady, born in 1973 in Westport, Connecticut. She graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1995. She holds 3 honorary doctorate degrees, one from Wisconsin-Madison, one from Bates College in Maine, and one from the University of New York. She began a professional photography career with the Buenos Aires Herald in Argentina in 1996 with no previous photographic training. After college, she just went down there and took a job as a photographer and had never had any training in that field. In the late 1990s, she moved back to New York City, where she worked for the Associated Press for 1 year, but then moved back to Argentina. While in Argentina the second time, she focused on Cuba and the effect of communism on the public. She then traveled to Nepal, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and after the 9/11 attacks, she resolved to photograph Afghanistan and Pakistan under the Taliban. She has photographed for the New York Times Magazine, Time Magazine, Newsweek, and National Geographic. And she covered the Iraq War in Baghdad for the New York Times in 2003 and 2004. In March of 2011, she and 3 other New York Times journalists were held captive in Libya for 4 days, and she reported that she was threatened with death. She was beaten and groped during her captivity. So she's covered many what I would call hot zones. And again, she's known primarily as a conflict photographer. She's photographed in Afghanistan for over 15 years, going back and forth there. She's also photographed in Iraq, Darfur, Republic of Congo, Haiti, all over the Middle East, Chad, and Sudan. In 2002, she was presented the Infinity Award from the International Center of Photography. In 2008, she received a Getty Images grant for editorial photography for her work in Darfur. In 2009, she won a MacArthur Fellowship. And in 2009, she shared a Pulitzer Prize for international reporting with her team from the New York Times. The Pulitzer Committee noted the perilous condition under which she is performed. And she's won many other awards. So there's a photo of her there covering some conflict. She's been documenting war, civil war, asylum seeking refugees in Europe, the plight of women and children in some African nations, and maternal mortality in India. In 2015, she published a memoir, It's What I Do, a photographer's life of love and war. Warner Brothers has recently bought the rights to a movie based on her memoir to be directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Jennifer Lawrence as Lynsey Addario. And she's married to a journalist who works with Reuters, and they have one son. And I read a little bit of her book, and I don't know how she juggles it all. I really have no idea how she juggles this life. There's a photo of her, 2 photos of her, one in a pleasant surrounding and one in a war zone. So here are some images where she was embedded with soldiers. I believe this was in Afghanistan. She talked about it's taking her a while to build up trust with the troops. But she did that by simply keeping up with them and really not showing any more fear than they did. So said she thinks she gained access many times to some sort of dicey situations because she was a woman and they didn't suspect her of having any sort of nefarious purposes, or didn't think she would do anything sneaky. And that allowed her to document people, some dictators, and to even sneak into some countries where she wasn't supposed to be. I believe these were might have Libya or Darfur. I'm not remembering exactly. So she often tried to show the civilian cost of these conflicts as well. So not just what it was, the life of the soldiers, but the lives of the civilians in these locations where these conflicts were taking place. And she spent some time, another story for National Geographic, documenting the training that women in the military go through. So again, she didn't just fly in and document and leave. She spent time on these stories too, and sort of lived the stories. These were refugees, I believe, in Darfur. One of her most well-known stories had to do with birth-related mortality in the Sierra Leone, where there was insufficient health care for these young, sometimes very young teenage mothers who give birth and then unfortunately died due to insufficient health care right at birth. The photo, the bottom right here, are a group of photojournalists running from a bombing run taking place in Libya. And that's Lynsey is the photographer right on the left edge of the image. So obviously this photo was captured by somebody else. She was also kidnapped for a time in Libya and was held for 6 days, in which she was beaten and assaulted. One last photo of hers. So her was created by work that mattered, and to show the truth. She thought that's what photojournalism really is, and thought of her job really, or still thinks of her job as being there to bear witness to what's going on wherever it is that she happens to be covering the story. So there's a lot of online material about all three of these photographers. And you can see videos of their work and so on, but I hope to just kind of acquaint people with them, with the hope that you'll dig in a little further and look into some of the work that they do. All three of them showed an amazing amount of courage and grace under pressure to get the photos, whether they were shot in cities or war zones or just foreign countries in general. So that's all I have. Are there any questions out there?
I just have a couple of comments. You kind of ended with what I was thinking is, kind of this idea of you'll do anything to get the picture. These women are amazing that they were willing to really risk their lives in some cases in order to get the picture. The other thing I think it impresses me is just the power of photography to tell a story, to get people to, as you said, look at other people and understand other people. It's quite a tool we have at our disposal. So makes me think I shouldn't complain about, having to get up early to get a photograph, because
Yeah,
people are risking life and limb to get some of these. So
very true, very true. And these certainly weren't the first female photographers to be involved in conflicts of different sorts. Margaret Bork White covered some war back in the 1930s and 40s, I guess, and there have been others, but these are three that are relatively recent and still still active photographers.